the purpose for my videos and my blogs have only been to bring education and awareness to the jiu-jitsu community in regards to, hey, listen, there's something called carotid and vertebral artery dissections, and that can cause a stroke. The reason I know that is because I'm one of the people who did have a stroke, an ischemic stroke, as a result of a carotid artery dissection that I missed the signs and missed the symptoms. And because of that, I had a catastrophic injury. Other practitioners to date, as of 2001, have also either themselves or their teammates have missed signs, or even the medical professionals have missed signs. And that's been the big disconnect within not only our jiu-jitsu community, but also the medical community, is the disconnect about carotid artery and vertebral artery dissections that once there's a dissection, essentially, long story short, does form a clot. And if that clot is dislodged to your brain, that's what causes a massive stroke. To date, we've had a number of practitioners who have ignored the signs, and or the medical community ignored the severity of these signs, and those people are no longer with us today, which is a very sad tragedy, considering these are people who are recreationalists and hobbyists, and who all and have families that depend on them. So that's been the reason that I've been doing these podcast interviews with people in the community. At first, it was really truly just to say, hey, this happened to me, it happened to this guy, and I just wanted to use it to share our stories. But then it began to snowball as more people started to read the stories. Unfortunately, the people that were reading these stories were practitioners who had already had a stroke because, again, either the medical community or themselves and their teammates ignored the signs. And again, it's just a disconnect in education. So now in 2021, my message to the community is, I was asked on a podcast, what is it? Do we modify chokes, or how do we modify training? I said, listen, modify it as everybody sees fit. However, the biggest thing that we need to modify is the fact that this is an unknown risk. And because we don't know the risk, we're not able to make practical decisions about how we want to train. So I was in Reddit just 3 days ago, and I was following up on some comments on a recent podcast that I was featured on for Forever White Belt, to see the type of comments that were going out there, to see if I could address any questions. And before I got to that, I found a article about a vertebral artery dissection in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It was from a Jiu-Jitsu athlete that appeared to have linked the strangle type of training to some type of potential neurological issue or symptoms, something that forced them to go to the hospital. And while they were at the hospital, although it was potentially almost misdiagnosed and they sent home, continuous questions because of this led to the correct scans and imaging that did find the evidence of a carotid artery dissection. However, the good news is, in this particular case, as I read in Reddit, the athlete did not have a stroke, and therefore there was no damage because they were able to find it. So I reached out because I'm going to be, this year during Stroke Awareness, instead of me sending out numerous random articles, I have been putting together a blog article that discusses signs and warnings, but wanted to have this interview right away because I wanted you to describe everything that happens, because it sounds to me like the fact that you did have a general awareness of what was going on with your body and an open discussion with the people that were treated you, you're able to have a conversation today and recover with no damage. And so thank you for coming on today. Does that sound kind of accurate?
That's spot on, man.
Okay. So yeah, I'm just going to let you take it from here. As far as, things that I'm very interested in is, the type of training, was this, were you getting ready for any type of competition? Was it hard training? Did you have any type of flu-like symptoms before when you're training? Did you have good rest? What type of training may have caused the dissection? What would be your guess? And then what led to going into the emergency room, and then what happened from there?
Cool. So I'll just start from the top, really. I'm in my late 30s, excellent health. I take very good care of myself, running, biking, swimming, surfing. I'm a very active dude given my age, and I've been practicing jiu-jitsu just shy of 18 months and just creeping real close to that blue belt level. As far as training goes, it's regular 5-6 days a week, weight training, jiu-jitsu. I'm in there pretty often. I don't really ever roll all that hard, and I've always been very much a tap early, tap often kind of guy. So if I'm in a choke or somebody has my neck, I'm usually very quick to just, I just tap and just move on to the next position, because if they got you, man. There's no sense in hanging on. So no, not really training for a competition. I'm mostly a hobbyist. I'm very interested in a lot of the modern jiu-jitsu stuff, but just kind of working through a lot of these basics to just, kind of get there. Anyway.
How long have you been training?
Just shy of 18 months. I've got about 350 hours on the mat across maybe 100. I think it's 152 classes I've been to at this point. I track everything.
Cool.
Pretty ridiculously. So I did start kind of late in life as far as jiu-jitsu goes, but it's better late than never.
Yep.
So that particular day in class, we were working clock chokes. My partner and I have been pretty consistent. Neither of us are, wrenching on each other at all. And I've had a consistent partner the entire time I've been at this gym. It's usually between one or two dudes every class. So we know our body types, and we don't need to wrench on anything to really get the technique. So clock chokes are notoriously bad for setting in real nice and deep, but we were working very lightly on each other. So come time for the rolls, I'm rolling with he's been a blue belt for a little over 2 years, and I'm passing his closed guard, and he gets a very, I would say, weak cross collar choke on me, and it was up against my jaw, and I was able to clear the leg and pass through, and I was clearing the choke at the same time, and during that time, and bear in mind, he's holding his choke extremely tight on my jaw, but I'm able to breathe. And it's not even around my neck at this point. As I'm clearing that elbow to kind of push through, the thumb, kind of like how you have your cross collar choke perched up, was very, very close to just underneath my jaw. And I felt it just slide and impact and like roll across the underside of my jaw. And in that moment, I was like, oh, that kind of sucked. But like, I didn't feel like there was no threat of like blood choke or airway choke. It was just, we're talking like a brief instant of just trauma, right? And we continued to roll. And it was, he's not overly aggressive. Nothing about that was out of the ordinary. I went and had a good couple other rolls. At no point other than that was my neck really threatened, just by working clock chokes all afternoon. But we finished up, and the terrifying part about all this is I feel absolutely normal. Like nothing is out of the ordinary. I'm still the same, strong self. And we have some lunch, we get home, and this is about 3 hours, I'd say, after class. And I start to shower, and I've had surgery before on both my arms. So I'm not unaccustomed to some tingling or numbness that goes, down my forearms or into my hands. But in this particular instant, while I'm washing my feet, my left hand goes numb, but it's basically split completely perfectly at the ring finger down to the pinky finger. And that cruises up my forearm. And that to me was the first warning sign of something's a little off. Because I do get numbness in my hands, but it's never that asymmetrical where it's usually the whole hand.
So 1 second here.
Sure.
I'm just going to have you explain that one more time. Go ahead. So explain the feeling in the arm.
So while I'm bent over, washing my feet after jiu-jitsu, I noticed after probably 30 seconds of being bent over that when I stood back up, my left hand had gone noticeably numb from the ring finger down to the pinky finger. So it split perfectly in half. And that numbness traveled perfectly up my entire forearm and was completely non-characteristic to numbness that I felt before due to surgery. And I've had surgery real close to my ulnar nerve, so that does create a little bit of numbness from time to time, but never has it been completely split. Like it's always been the whole hand or the whole arm, kind of like falling asleep, right? But this was not. This was noticeably different. So much so that it made me question, like, am I about to have a heart attack? Because you hear the stories like, oh, your left arm starts to, go weak or pain in your left arm. But as fast as it came on, within a minute and a half, 2 minutes, it was gone. It was completely fleeting. And so I finished my shower as I would normally and get dressed. And I go to sit down on the couch. And as I sit down to watch a little YouTube, I notice that I have spots in my vision, akin to like somebody had taken a camera with like an old school flash and taken a picture in like a dark room, and you have that like floaty, almost like burned in image in your eyeball. And normally that goes away. It's bright where I live, so I didn't think anything of that initially because I figure, oh, it'll go away. And in that same instance, I'm thinking like I kind of had a little bit of a headache, and I get caffeine headaches. Everybody gets caffeine headaches. We're talking like a 0.5 to 1 out of 10 on the pain scale. So I'm just thinking maybe I didn't drink any coffee. Maybe I'm fatigued, whatever. We do put a lot of time on the mats. So I just kind of was like, I'll just relax and set this out. The spots didn't really wane too much, and the headache was pretty consistent. The difference this time was the asymmetricality of that headache was different. Like getting a headache behind your eyes happens. Everybody feels that at some point. But this was very unique in the fact that it was just behind one eye, almost like, like extreme sinus pressure, but it was elevated and just behind my eyeball. And it was the opposite side of my arm. So my left arm went numb, but my right eye was feeling this dull coffee headache pressure, essentially. It's really the only way I can think to describe it, because it wasn't anything like a migraine. I've seen people get migraines and they're knocked on their ass for a day. For me, this was just like a mild inconvenience, like not something that I would really pay attention to on its own. So I'm talking with my wife about going to dinner, thinking I don't really want to. I don't feel great. Eventually, I get convinced to go to dinner, and so I just stood up, nothing different, walked over to my counter, and it was like a light switch had gone off, and I blinked, and in that moment, my vision had completely shifted both vertically and horizontally. And I felt like somebody had drugged me, like how different that vision is, because everybody can cross their eyes, but that's just a horizontal deal. When my vision was like vertically and horizontally completely doubled, alarm bells are just going off. And now all of those other symptoms are starting to make way more sense. Like, oh, that numbness in my arm, the headache, the spots in my vision that still haven't gone away. Just the numbness had gone away. Once the double vision set in, I was like, I didn't know what else to do other than like, what causes double vision? And it's like stroke, transischemic attack, and carotid artery dissection are like the three major courses or diagnosis for sudden onset double vision or diplopia. So with that said, dinner was canceled effectively for the night, and we made our way to the emergency room. And thankfully, when your brain is screwed up, the ER doesn't really screw around with admitting you in and getting you taken care of. So moving on to that phase, the hospital itself was very accommodating, but they were skeptical originally of my symptoms, so much so that I actually overheard some of the medical professionals discussing my case, thinking, oh, he's young, it's probably just a migraine. And in my head, I'm like, I don't get migraines. And I audibly let them know, like, I've never had a migraine. And I've never heard of a migraine that causes numbness in your hand or double vision. Like, those two things are pretty unique and mutually exclusive from a migraine. And my experience is entirely limited to my mother, who used to get migraines all the time. And, she just goes down hard in the bed and she's done for the day. Whereas this is like, if it weren't for the double vision, I might be dead on the couch, like, in all honesty, because I would have written off that numbness in my arm due to the surgery. So thankfully that did happen. But anyway, the doctor was reviewing my case, and he came up to me. He's like, I really do think that it's probably a migraine, but I can't explain medically these symptoms without digging deeper. And, I'm fortunate to have the insurance that I do, that all of this stuff was covered. So he, was able to order a contrast CT without any issue. And it was in that contrast CT that all of my fears were actually confirmed. Originally, I went on this whole internal diatribe of like, is this because I got the vaccine? Is my shit breaking? Like, I've been healthy my whole life and now I'm having like stroke symptoms. What am I going to do? But it turns out that there was a very clear physical sign that my artery was dissected. I had a 6 millimeter tear on the right artery, just below the bifurcation in your brain. So it's right where the artery splits.
That's let me tell you something very unique. Mine was on the same point as yours, and hearing you tell me that you guys were working clock chokes is very interesting, because at the time I was training under my coach Mark Lehman. We were doing a lot, I would say more than average, more than like really, really more than average. Like the clock choke was Mark's go-to. Like if they turtle, you on top get the cross collar and start looking for the leg, grab the pant leg and start walking. We were doing a lot of that. So you and I had a dissection in the same spot, and I know both of us were working on clock chokes. Very interesting. So go ahead.
I'm almost 100% positive that I did sustain that injury that day. I'm pretty sure it was during the roll, but it very well could have been from the collar work earlier. But those are the only two things that really changed. Like, and at no point was I at risk of going out cold.
Right.
The only noticeable thing was just sustained, trauma to the neck, which we're not unaccustomed to in jiu-jitsu. It happens. Like, it's part of, the day-to-day grind. And you let your partners get it nice and good and cinch it so that they can get the feel to finish, right?
Right.
You want to be a good partner.
100%.
So I did have that tear. It was a full 6 millimeters. That tiny, tiny tear actually caused a blockage of about 85% in my right artery. So not only was the dissection like restricting blood flow to the brain, it also had formed a noticeably large clot in between the layers of the artery. And this is after the fact, talking to the vascular surgeon. He thinks that the reason I experienced the symptoms that I did when I did was largely due to the sudden change in direction while I was in the shower, like bending down and staying semi-inverted for 30 seconds to a minute while I was washing my feet. And he's like, that might have broken off just enough clot to get into your brain to cause that brief episode of symptoms. And
does that include the blurry vision?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had none of that until I got out of the shower.
Okay.
So we get evidence that I've got the carotid dissection. I'm now being evaluated by every resident and medical professional that they can get in there, from neurology to the vascular department to the emergency room. And when I got admitted, I was very forward with the fact that I was practicing jiu-jitsu. I practice it often. We do a lot of neck manipulations. I also visit a chiropractor enough to let them know that that's something that I do. So these I wanted them to know that it could very well be likely due to this this neck trauma. I had a car accident months earlier, but that was on the other side of my body, and it didn't physiologically make sense that it could have resulted from that trauma, because it was on the seatbelt was on the completely other side, and it was so much higher. We're talking a centimeter below your jaw is about where this was, and being a 6 millimeter tear was pretty large for that guy. So I get admitted to the ICU, and I'm being watched like a hawk, and mostly, and I didn't really know this until I started reading about carotid artery dissections and how they are incredibly rare to be found prior to a stroke. The most often times they find these is after a large stroke or death. And reading that made me feel just incredibly lucky and fortunate that I listened to the handful of symptoms to just get my ass into the ER and at least get seen. And then just being forward enough with the doctors to, just dig a little deeper, explain, all of these symptoms in some way. And that contrasting teeth probably saved my life. Had anybody been influenced by that nurse's real shitty, diagnosis of, oh, he's in his late 30s, probably just a migraine, I might have died on my couch that weekend.
Well, very, very interesting that you say that, because if you went through my YouTube videos and you listen to a couple of these, you hear a lot of that reoccurring theme. For example, one of the videos is called "A Stroke from Jiu-Jitsu Misdiagnosed." Not only was it misdiagnosed within the training facility, but was also misdiagnosed by the emergency first responders, the hospital sent her home. I mean, it's just a lot of sending home because, and the reason is for exactly what your nurse said, which was, hey, young guy, probably dehydrated, probably just a headache. I don't know if she said dehydrated, but I hear that a lot. Yeah.
So I'm sitting here just combing through literature, Reddit, the internet. I did come across your multi-part series where you were interviewing a number of dudes, mainly because when I got admitted to the ICU, the chief of neurology came up to me and basically said, you will never participate in jiu-jitsu again. You'll never surf. You'll never do any of these activities that you want to do because you'll be at risk for stroke your entire life. And I was crushed. I'm absolutely crushed. Plus,
oh yeah.
My career is dependent on me being able to use my brain as well, just like anybody else's. So I'm looking around for any sort of anecdotal experience. Like, fuck, did people come back from this? And sure enough, it was, your collection of stories that, put a little bit of, I guess, wind back in my sails. Like, this is, it can be done. Like, you're actually on the better side of this equation because you dodged the worst possible outcome.
Yeah.
And so moving forward, after my stint in the ICU,
let me share with you my final thoughts.
I had a follow-up ultrasound that wound up being extremely good news in terms that the ultrasound technician couldn't actually find evidence of the tear anymore as they're doing their cross sections and blood velocity analysis. The chief of vascular surgery actually came in to do the ultrasound himself just to find it, and they found a very small indication that there was something still there. So I was basically released on a regimen, take aspirin, and this whole week you are to do nothing but walk. That's really it. Which was a hard time. It's a hard thing to step back and go from training 6+ days a week to now you're just chilling.
It is, but here's what's interesting. The one thing that I've said in a lot of my interviews, and I, like I said, I've never been I'm not a medical doctor, but not just from listening to the stroke survivor stories, but I've had a number of conversations with people who have had similar symptoms to yours. Mm-hmm. And then they've reached out to me and or my associate Josh, who's more into the emergency medicine than I am. I'm not into anything except doing these interviews, but I've done enough of these interviews to have enough knowledge to know that doesn't seem right. For example, the vision, the one eye, I understand what you mean when you're saying that the tingling could be, and sometimes we have different things, but the vision is really what really got you on your red alert. Well, what's interesting in that is that I've said, a lot of people are going in and then they're coming back to me and they're saying, because I'm telling them, I'm like, dude, you need to go to the ER right away. Like, you just have to, just trust me. I'm like, I'm sorry to tell you this because I know it's going to be expensive. To a lot of people's, then their insurance doesn't cover it. But I'm like, you just got to go and get those scans done because you really need to know. And a lot of people have come back, and even when I sent that referral to them, telling them that I thought they could go in, like I really, really, really believe that they were showing some signs of carotid artery dissection, or signs of almost going to have a stroke. And then they came back later on having a scan a couple days later or whatever it was, and then they're telling me that everything looks good. And I started to say on my podcast, I say, guys and girls, I'm like, I think in many of us young athletes, if these are happening more so than we think because we're not getting them, diagnosed like you did, I'm thinking that these things can heal up pretty quickly.
That's I definitely am in the same camp as you, thinking that. And I'm speaking now 2 weeks out from my injury and being on a regimen of just aspirin. I am super fortunate that I did take pretty good care of myself. And a lot of my health, I largely credit to jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu kind of forces you to live a healthier life.
Yeah, it does.
Because, I mean, we've all practiced on a full stomach of bad food, and you pay for it. So you make these tiny improvements over time, and I'm still barely 18 months into this and fully addicted. So when I look at somebody who's got 10, 20, 30 years, most of these guys are largely very healthy individuals because they've been in the game so much longer. And to follow up on that, I had my appointment. It was basically a week after follow-up appointment with the vascular surgeon to basically double check and verify. I'm going to back this up just for a second.
Go ahead.
To go back to the time in the ICU. So in addition to being evaluated by all these medical professionals, one of the things that they were looking for was they did seem concerned to be able to diagnose this without these contrast images.
Right.
So there was a lot of listening to each side of my arteries to see if they could, diagnose this without having to get deep into the weeds and just kind of make it more of like a standard of practice. Because I don't like to be the special case, but in this case, if it saves somebody from having a stroke, like, dude, do all the tests you can do on me, especially if we can avoid having to do those expensive imaging that some people, it's just cost prohibitive to be able to do. I don't know where they went with that. They might have gotten some useful data from me. I hope they did. But the MRI, I was super, super lucky that it showed up clean, because they were worried that I might have had some lasting ischemia in the brain due to the symptoms that I did have. But thankfully, whatever clot broke off and got into my brain was quickly cleared out due to, I don't know, whether it was my vascular health in general or getting seen in the ER and then throwing me on aspirin within the first couple hours of being there. I don't know what factor in that led to me being, clean on my MRI. But I will say early detection and just a vigilance in getting seen was probably a huge plus there. But now moving on to this follow-up. So we're now a week out. I've spent the entire week just taking it easy, walking, and just eating healthy. And we have a new contrast CT, and I get the evaluation. And the doctor's telling me, he's like, look, I don't normally say this, but things are looking good. We've gone from a 85% blockage and a significant clot to you're now 15% blocked and no evidence of any clot. And the tear itself looks to be reduced from 6 millimeters to approximately 1 millimeter in size. And he's very confident that given time, rest, and a regimen of aspirin to prevent clots from building up, that this will in fact heal over time.
Yep.
So he did give me the good news, like, we're gonna see you in 90 days, and given that follow-up 90-day contrast scan, we will reduce your regimen of aspirin. I'm on a pretty heavy dose right now.
Yep. Yeah,
at 180 days, if that thing wasn't healed up by 90 and it's healed up by 180, perhaps you go completely off the aspirin and you're free to live your life like a normal human being. Like, the neurologist was all doom and gloom, but they deal with the worst case scenario all the time. And there isn't a whole lot of literature on this particular injury in young athletes pre-stroke. So I'm super optimistic that vascular surgeon is also optimistic, and I'm now just cleared to do physical fitness on my own, provided I don't have any sort of hyperextension of the neck or any neck manipulation in general. So I have been attending class. My partner is very intimately attuned to what injury I do have. And if the class itself is any measure of neck manipulation or impact, I just observe and don't participate. I've only been to 3 classes since, but it's been good. And the coach himself is also super aware and was very open to hearing my story and understanding, the impact that a lot of these manipulations could have. But my like goal in sharing this with my gym wasn't to get people to stop doing any of this. It was to recognize the symptoms in your partners and in yourself if you do ever experience this, because it is the most terrifying part of this is you feel normal for the most part, and all of the symptoms individually on their own don't really feel threatening, except the double vision. That will scare the living shit out of you. And I know other people exhibit different symptoms like aphasia or like loss of memory and unable to speak and all sorts of other things. But my suggestion is to the sport at large, just really listen to what your body is telling you and don't write off any of these symptoms as innocuous. Every single symptom has a cause, and knowing those causes is going to save your life, or maybe your partner's life. So it's only been 2 weeks, and I'm just trying to get back into things slowly and really just taking care of my neck. Protect your neck is a very real future for me. And so once I am fully clear to get back on the mats and start sparring, I'm probably going to be a little bit more conscious of not fighting through chokes. Not that I really ever did in the first place, but if somebody's got you, they got you. There's no sense in fighting through that if you can just reset the match and start over.
So let me share some words of advice now on my end as somebody who's been back in jiu-jitsu now for almost 4 years since my accident. And you're exactly right with the Wu-Tang saying with protecting our necks. It's very, very real. But it's not just, and what you just said is exactly what I just said the other day. I'm like, listen, hey guys, if you get caught in it, you really shouldn't have got there in the first place. Probably a good idea to fight out. But I'm going to tell you that it's beyond that. So from a preventative and awareness standpoint, it's even letting people get those grips on the lapels and the cross faces that really get deep around those carotid arteries or the vertebral arteries. Because my boy Josh had a vertebral artery dissection, and he was defending a triangle choke. He was in the guy's guard, and the guy was basically pulling the lapels over the back of the neck. So that, and then just like I said, like how your partner had a cross collar on you, and that grip in itself, I mean, there is torque and there is tension on the arteries.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So, and I've talked about this with other survivors, like when you go back, it is a whole different game, and you do have to have a different mindset that you're fighting with more of a sense of urgency on the grip fight and the hand fight, and just not accepting that you're losing that battle on the grip fight, especially on the lapels. And if you have to surrender because you're rolling with somebody like super duper strong or whatever, then so be it. You're just going to have to, live to fight another day. And that's 100% the truth of it. I want to ask you, what if you would have ignored the signs, what do you think? So you had a carotid artery dissection, but you didn't have a stroke. Can you tell me, just, I don't know how much research you did or whose story you listened to, but let me just hear the other ending of the story. If we're having this interview, what could have happened if you would have ignored all the signs, went out to dinner that night, and then pretended to chalk it up like a normal day of training and dehydration and so forth and so on? What do you think? How could it have played out?
So in learning about this injury completely from scratch due to suffering it, every bit of scientific literature that I found in regarding any vertebral or carotid artery dissections, like in lockstep, is like 90% of all strokes that are going to happen in the case of a dissection are going to happen within the first 48 hours. So, like, just theory crafting what could have happened, right? I spend the majority of my weekend hanging out with my dogs and sitting on the couch, and we walk, talk, whatever, go surfing. Any number of things could have led to the full dislodgement of this clot that's happening, and like you don't know that it's going on. There's no pain really associated with this, especially when it's so soon. Like we're talking hours after the injury. The end result was within the first 2 days, I could have been at the very worst dead, and the very best, I could have suffered a full ischemic stroke.
Right.
And on the off chance that I was the random super lucky person that didn't suffer that in the first 48 hours, then you're talking the next 6 months waiting for this to heal.
Right.
Ticking time bomb.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, so you're exactly right about the first 48 hours. Like that sounds about accurate, and that's a huge risk. However, if you ignore those signs and you just keep going on, and every day that week you're working on clock chokes.
Yep.
On the same exact side, I don't know if you're giving yourself a chance to heal, and you're exactly right when you say ticking time bomb. And I think that's the danger of jiu-jitsu athletes. Here's why. If somebody has a traumatic experience, like a seatbelt whiplash, could cause a dissection. I've read stories of that. I've read swinging a golf club at the country club. I've read swimming, surfing, jetboarding, jets. I've seen it all. There's studies. You can find it all. So most of those people, after their incident, I would say a lot of those people kind of go back to normal life, and maybe probably sedentary or whatever it is. They're not on the mats trying to strangle each other. I can assure you of that, because we're a very
putting pressure on their neck.
Yeah. So we're a very unique breed. And so, like I said, what's very unique about your story is the fact that you were using critical thinking to listen to your body, figure out what could be going on. And so just to share my story before my ischemic stroke was I did ignore those signs. So mine could have been prevented, and my life would have been a different outcome right now. Of course, I just wanted to share a quote, which is I heard it on a podcast, and it says, life doesn't happen to you, it happens, for you. And, trying to look at, the obstacles of what happened to me, and trying to put a positive spin on shit. Obviously, that's just what you do with anything. But I do want to say that right now, as we're having this interview, I've had conversations in the last 2 months with widows about their husbands who have passed away from this due to misdiagnosis in the medical community in one regard, and another regard just misdiagnosis, or just ignoring the symptoms, I should say. That's tragic, but then also there is somebody right now fighting for his life, in an ICU without complete control of his brain and his body and whatnot. It's and to be honest, in the last three months, I've gotten like 4 or 5 new. Everybody I talk to is linked to somebody who's like been laying in the hospital in the last 3 months, if that makes any sense. Which is just also tells me that my statistics would say, I'm not a genius by any means, but the growth and popularity of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has something to do with the fact that, a lot of people say, well, why don't we have data on this, from years ago? Well, I could tell you 10 years ago, it wasn't even close to the amount of people on the mats as it is now, and not even a close. And also, again, popularity of the UFC and just the martial art in general. So the biggest danger is the lack of education and awareness. I am also almost done with getting some of our stories published by Dr. Sam Stedplug, who is in a research department, an ER doctor in Minnesota, and he's helping us get a medical article published, just stories of people that had a dissection as a cause of a stroke, or as from the result of a choke that caused a stroke. And so then that information can be used in the medical community. So people like the nurse who were just, you're trying to tell her that, like, listen, I've been strangled. This just doesn't make sense. I don't get this regularly. You have to listen to me. This isn't normal. Instead of her sending you home and giving advice to the doctor, who's probably just buried with work, and probably does look to a lot of these people's nurse practitioners' opinions in their discharge or their medical care. And from an insurance standpoint, let me say this: why exactly are people not just automatically running these CTs and MRAs with contrast when people come in? Well, number one, I think it's a miseducation. Number two, though, as well, is it could be a cost thing with insurance companies paying less for people, and the cost of care increasing, and medical inflation, and what the hospitals are taking home and getting paid from the insurance companies, private and public payers, they're probably looking to cut costs, and they probably will skip a lot of people who, like you said, in that 48 hours, which is a lot of these people that I've interviewed so far, have been sent home, and then 48 hours later is when it's the stroke cause, and that is actually costing them more than it really needs to be. So, but either way, we're playing with fire if we don't know the signs. And I'm looking forward to getting this paper published. But I just wanted to, like I said, thank you for sharing your story on Reddit. It's just a great example of preventative diagnosis and getting the proper care, using critical thinking in how we're looking at things, and that's an example to be learned not only from the jiu-jitsu community, but like I said, from the medical community as well.
I will say, while I was in the hospital, reading the experiences of others and yourself was one of the things that actually inspired me to share this story, coupled with the fact that I was such a weird guinea pig in the ICU, being observed and being, asked my story, at least 100 times while I was there. While that nurse is probably eating her words, realizing that she could have, caused a death. I think that experience of realizing, wow, this guy came in with these symptoms, with this, background and hobby. Maybe we should be a little bit more vigilant when these symptoms start presenting themselves in younger practitioners of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Just to be as a standard of care, like this is the new standard, given X symptoms that can be attributed to a dissection. And one of the things that I read from my experience being shared on Reddit, I don't know who originally said this quote, but the whole tapping, you're not tapping to the choke, you're tapping to the mistakes you made, 7 or 8 moves before that. Like you basically ran yourself into the wall, and it's those mistakes that really led to this position. So, that's why you're tapping. So don't have any ego in this. You made those mistakes a long time.
I love that.
So better to live to fight another day, like you said. So yeah, I'm very happy that things worked out the way they did. Given the symptoms, I firmly believe I wound up with the best possible outcome, short of it just being a fluke, nothing. Having physical evidence of this is your injury, that injury led to this blood clot led to these symptoms. Having that concrete diagnosis is extremely comforting moving forward, because I know exactly what went wrong, largely the reason because of it, and how to mitigate it moving forward, providing that I don't wind up with any massive scar tissue or anything like that, which the doctor doesn't think will happen. Because I took good care of myself before that, I'm able to bounce back from this pretty quickly. You're talking, 1 week out, and the majority of it has already healed from 6 millimeters down to 1 with just aspirin and rest. Vice, months, years, maybe a lifetime of dealing with the outcome of a full ischemic stroke that could have just, it could have killed me, or it could have taken me out of the game permanently forever. And not just the game of jiu-jitsu, but life, my career, all that stuff.
I can tell you firsthand that, like I said on a podcast recently, the Forever White Belt podcast, and then I was on the Roll or Die podcast just last week talking about my experience, and I'm like, I'm a really bad example of somebody who had an ischemic stroke, because when I do these interviews and I speak, people are probably thinking like, oh, this guy sounds good, he looks fine, he's not in a wheelchair or anything like that. But the truth is that there is damage to my brain that I don't have the same proficiency in certain things, reading, writing, thought, organizing. Just I can't explain all of it, but it's not the same as I was before, and it is a challenge. It's a life challenge, and it's not an excuse by any means for any type of poor performance professionally or just in general, but it is real. And what I do, that I think, my purpose in what has happened to me though is the fact that just trying to bring education and awareness from a prevention standpoint, because number one, it is detrimental. Like we have a stroke group of people who have had their survivors from jiu-jitsu, and we have a Facebook group, and we all share stories, and everybody has gone through a big challenge, just from the damage that it's caused, emotionally, physically, anxiety. So, but I guess the good news is, from all of us that are kind of like pioneer stroke, survivors from jiu-jitsu, is that we've been able to lay a little bit of groundwork. And so I'm thinking that, I'm going to be placing this interview in my one blog that I'm going to do for May, for Stroke Awareness Month. Usually, like I said, I just different articles, but this year it's going to be one article. It's going to talk about prevention, and it's going to share this story as well, just so people have an idea of, hey, if you follow these rules, signs of, and you're aware, and you have this a conversation at your academy with your training partners. And like I said, the big common denominator about all the stroke survivors that we have, that the common denominator has been like, hey, did you know that something like this could happen as a result of what we're doing? And all of us were like, yeah, we had no idea. So crazy. Yeah, except for one guy, like I said, Josh is an outlier. He actually knew that something like this could happen, but that's a great example of somebody. And if you're anybody watching this and you're wanting to know like what I mean by misdiagnosis from the medical community, go watch my interview with Josh Vera, because he works in the ER and he helps diagnose people with carotid artery and vertebral artery dissections. And the imaging department and the completely missed it. So it tells us not only that strokes are, like you said, very underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, and that's the danger of this whole thing, because they send people home, and then again, that's what happened to Josh. Within 48 hours later, he's on the mat, and the clot dislodges, and during that time, so because he went home and he thought things were clear, unlike yourself, you were sent home because you had the proper imaging, but you weren't sent home with things are clear. It was you're going to go sit and you're going to heal, and you're going to be fine, and that's and you're not going to take on any more damage. And you know what? For now, it's like I said, this is jiu-jitsu's, and that's the other quote that I wrote down for today, was that used to injure us or hurt us, now we are beginning to create safer practices for longevity in jiu-jitsu. And that's it. It's what used to give us strokes, now we're aware that it can happen, and we're just making sure that we have the proper procedures and understanding and protocols at our training facility, with our family members in our medical communities, so that we can continue to train jiu-jitsu for a long time, all of us. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, is take this time to heal, enjoy the process. You'll be back on the mats. I know you're 18 months in, so that's a time where you really are addicted to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And my third, and I promise my last quote of the night here I wrote down for this interview was, I listened to a podcast and heard another black belt talking about this. He said one reason that Jiu-Jitsu athletes are so prone to injury versus other sports is the fact that Jiu-Jitsu is so addictive by nature, is what makes all of us want to train a ton and keep going back and not giving us enough time to rest and repair, and that's what makes us more prone to injuries. So, point being, take this time to rest and repair, and you're going to be able to, train this the rest of your life. Because of what you know now, my guess is you'll probably never have another carotid artery dissection, and let's hope that's my goal, because I want to do this. And more, it's like I said, now for me, 4 years out, it's more of I want to just stay alive and see my grandkids. It's not anymore about the sport. I'm not at the point where it's like, oh, I'm really sad. I want to give the sport's just kind of there. Like, I'm there. I'm still doing it every day. Like, I'm addicted to it. Like before our interview today, I was just doing videos and notes because now I'm working on some stuff from Half Guard that I think is really cool. And I'm addicted to it now, 14 years later than the first day I started, even knowing what happened to me. But I guess the positive spin on that is that because I kind of know and I'm learning more about the signs and the symptoms, I'm not as scared, because if I can identify stuff right away and nip it in the butt, and also don't put myself in the bad situations that I would be concerned about, chances are I'm going to be able to do this forever as well. So that's kind of my goal.
I will say, in learning about this and experiencing this injury for myself, one of the most reassuring things that the doctor mentioned was, you have the awareness of what these symptoms are. And so that first week when I didn't have that, that follow-up contrast imaging, I had what I would call like hypervigilance, almost like anxiety. I don't get anxiety. I'm a happy dude. But I started thinking like every little tiny wisp or flash of what I thought was maybe blurry vision or something, or did I look at something too bright? It was like, it's kind of like that internal, fight or flight, that whole anxiety thing that I'd never experienced before in my life was now a very real thing, where like I just did not want that to happen. But that follow-up imaging showing that you've healed substantially, there's no evidence of clot, you don't in fact have any of those symptoms, really reassured me moving forward and helped to dumb down that anxiety. But one of the things he did say was, look, I'm giving you the go-ahead to start, physical training on your own, within the confines of these limitations. Protect your neck, basically, and stay. He definitely said stay off the mats and don't do anything like that. But he did say if you experience any of these symptoms at all, as long as you're here within 4 hours. Well, he's saying 3. He's saying that gives him a little window.
Yeah.
Within 3 hours, like, they can do so much more for stroke prevention than they can after the fact. So knowing that gave me a huge sense of reassurance that if I ever am at risk again, provided that I can get to a hospital within 3 hours, he's like, you're going to be just fine. Like, you're still going to live to a full healthy life. You just gotta just recognize these symptoms. So that was super helpful and helpful to really reassure me moving forward. So
that reassures me, and it reassures. I can assure you, it's going to reassure everybody getting back to jiu-jitsu after one of these, and that's something that you're adding a lot of confidence to us, and it also reassures what we need to do as far as the importance of the time, the be fast and knowing the signs right away, and that time window.
Like I feel like I'm speaking from like a position of just extreme luck and fortune that I am on this side of this injury before the worst of it could happen, and it was all because of just this amalgamation of symptoms. I really credit that double vision as being the sole thing that really pushed me to go. But now looking back, any combination of those symptoms at once, the blurry vision, the numbness, the asymmetrical headache, any of those in conjunction with each other should be absolute red flags to anybody moving forward, to at the very least recognize that something might be wrong. Like you might need to be seen. And those unique symptoms like the double vision, the aphasia, the loss of awareness, those things are obviously going to kick your ass into gear to really get to the ER. But those specific three symptoms of the blurry vision, the numbness, and that headache, those are pretty telltale signs of like that, you might be going down that path. That could be like the early warning signs. And I'm sure, you looking back, I think in reading your experience, you're like, I experienced X, Y, and Z,
Yep.
but not, A, B, and C. So, all of these are pretty normal things that happen. And, you were that 10% that didn't happen and to have the stroke right out the gate, but unfortunately wound up having it way later. So I'm happy that I'm living proof that early detection can lead to a perfectly normal life, free of stroke. And I hope to, prove that in the next, 90 and 180 days, and eventually maybe be off aspirin for the rest of my life. But, low dose aspirin isn't necessarily all that bad.
I mean,
definitely will keep some on hand forever.
Yeah, I mean, baby aspirin. I am taking it every day. It's not expensive. Not sure exactly how long I'll have to take it, but I am taking it. Luckily, I'm not taking any like Plavix or anything like that.
Yeah.
The reason I don't have to is because I didn't have any high blood pressure or cholesterol, when I had the stroke. It was, like you said, healthy young. I think I was 39 at the time when I had it, and healthy.
Same age. Geez.
Yeah, yep. That's also interesting as well. So, well, cool. I'm gonna hit off real quick on this recording, unless you got anything else to say on the recording right now.
No, I'm very happy that we got to have this interview. I hope that my experience reassures practitioners that it's not the end of the world, but please recognize how you feel. You only get one brain.
Yeah.
Like, you can fix an arm, you can fix a shoulder, you can fix a knee. When your brain goes, you're done. So take good care of yourself and recognize any of these symptoms as extreme emergencies and get yourself the help that you need. Like, there is no cost too great to save your brain.
No, that's for sure. And I'll just throw my last seamless plug in. It says, if you're worried about costs of medical costs, go to jujitsuinsurance.com, and there are policies that you can pick up that help pay for this type of care, regardless of what type of insurance you also have. So I'll throw that out there to listeners. But yeah, man, thank you so much. I'm going to